We had our Northwest area agronomist present yesterday, and so today we rounded out with the Eastern Oklahoma boys. First up, as we get into this, is Mr. Brian Pugh, Northeast area agronomist. So, Brian, I'll let you do the full introduction and your topic. Do you want lapel or that?
I can probably use this. Thank you, Dr. Arnold. And again, I don't know how much more introduction I need than that. I do have some bad news for you, though. I was talking to Zach a while ago, and he said everybody in the room knows about herbicide-coated fertilizer. So we might need to pick a different topic. What does Zach know? That's what friends are for. They give you a hard time. Okay, well, today I'm going to discuss a little bit of the research that we've been working on with herbicide-coated fertilizer. There's quite a few different names for that, and we'll cover that here in just a minute. You may know it by other names. DFI, dry fertilizer impregnation, is what we see on a lot of those company trials that are coming out. But before we do that, you know me, we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to have a test because everybody loves tests, right? All right, so here's the first one. And this is a question that we get a lot through county offices. I deal with this quite a lot myself as an area specialist. We get this question right here. Everybody has a budget. Dollars to spend. Should I spray or should I? Okay. What do you think most producers are going to pick? And why? Herbicide, because of cost, right? It's cheaper. Fertility's high. We're going to spend quite a bit more on a per acre basis. So I want to walk you through this. This is some old data. It's about 20 years old now. But again, good data. Doesn't matter. It's timeless. Doesn't matter how old it is. I have some 1937 data on broom sedge that I break out every now and then. You laugh, but that's true. So let's start right up here. This is a picture, a little trial we did. We had lance leaf ragweed, western ragweed, very weak in Bermuda grass system there, had been overgrazed for about 15 years. Producer admitted that. And this was an area we decided we're going to do nothing. So we fenced this entire area off. Cattle were not allowed access to that for the entire summer. That's a summer's worth of growth that you're looking at right there. And by the way, the rainfall wasn't bad that year. What do you think we're going to see with a properly timed herbicide application? And it doesn't matter what product we use. Let's just assume it's the correct product at the correct time. What do you think the next picture is going to show? Grass. Thank you for being interactive here. I got a lot of answers on the first picture. No one wants to step up now. Yeah, grass. Okay. And I'll also hear at the coffee shop, well, that grass will be knee deep if we spray a herbicide. Okay, it just blows up. We typically don't see that. Most herbicide trials show for every pound of weeds we control at a young, immature stage before they've used resources, we're going to get about a pound of forage down the road. Okay, so that 11-inch tall piece of paper you see there, again, we did a good job of shifting the species composition, but we didn't make that much additional yield. Now, Dr. Arnold is going to get pretty giddy here. 100 pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium based on the soil test. What do you think we're going to see there? What'd you say? Tall grass?
Is there weed control on that plant too?
Just 100 pounds of N, P, and K. No herbicide. Oh, okay. Bingo. So if we're running goats, we're happy, right? If we're running cattle, we're probably not, especially if those are unpalatable weeds. But what happened? What happened there? Why didn't we see the grass respond? Think about what I told you, the scenario there, what had happened to that site for 15 years. We'd overgrazed it. We weakened that forage stand. That forage is slow to respond to nutrients and moisture. These annual weeds, they don't know that it was a drought last year. They don't know it's been overgrazed for 15 years. So they're going to capitalize on those resources very quickly. Last but not least, we're doing both, fertility and herbicide. What do you think we're going to see here? Yeah, bingo. That's really ultimately what we're trying to get to. And that's why on a lot of these sites that have either been mistreated, maybe overgrazed, or what we're in right now is these climatic cycles that have been really hard on our grass over the last decade or so. These stands are weak for the most part. We need to think about doing both. I won't spend much time here, but again, we made about 700 pounds of grass on that check plot, the do nothing plot. You'll notice we did get about a pound for pound trade when we used that herbicide. A lot of trials will correlate real well with that data and show the same thing. You'll also notice we made about the same amount of grass production with fertility alone. So again, most of those nutrients went into the broadleaf weeds that were on that site. But here's the real telltale, and then I'll get into the herbicide-coated fertilizer. I want everybody to look at this left column, and I do this in programs quite a bit, and I want you to pick, you don't have to say it out loud, but pick your treatment. You saw the pictures, pick what you would do on your own property. Okay, I think for most of us, over 90% are going to be right down here, the last two options. That's what they would pick. We're going to run the herbicide. It's cheaper per acre. We just mentioned that earlier. But the problem is we don't feed cows acres, okay? Josh's acre is different than my acre when we look at it from a productivity standpoint. What do we feed cows? Pounds of forage or tons of forage, right? So we need to be able to compare apples to apples. We need to put it on a pounds of additional forage or cost of additional forage basis. And what you'll notice is these cheaper treatments per acre actually cost the most for each additional ton of forage. We weren't getting those huge responses of additional grass. The most expensive treatment here per acre actually ended up being the cheapest per additional ton of production. Does that make some sense? So again, that's why on a lot of these sites, herbicide plus fertility is super important. And that's why the topic we're approaching here today, herbicide-coated fertilizer, works so well, because we can do both of those in one pass. All right, so a lot of you may know this. I've got to get this open. You're going to hold it up to my mouth? That'd be awkward. Somebody would take a picture of that, I'm sure. All right, the method formerly known as HIF, that's what it started as 10, 12 years ago. A lot of the protocols we got were called herbicide-impregnated fertilizer. There were some negative connotations with one of those words there, so some of the companies wanted to change that. We've seen HCF, herbicide-coated fertilizer. Again, that is Ultigrace is not a trade name using that system of essentially what we're talking concept, okay? Competition, control weeds, and apply those nutrients that we need at the same time. Labeled herbicide options for this, probably the most popular would be 2,4-D and aminopyrrolid. Again, the old standby would be Grazon, but that also applies to generics. And there is a new generic symbol that's called Malibu D. With that product this summer, D and aminopyrrolid option be aminopyrrolid and pyroxafen benzyl. Is another good product that is trade name is Duracor. Okay, so many of y'all have experience with Duracor. This one here, I can't tell if it is still actually labeled or not. Somebody might be able to help. If you go to CDMS labels, it still has the section 2EE that you can find there, but it has the old Dow up at the top. So I know since Corteva's taken over, they do not have it on the Corteva page as an option for DFI, but it used to be. What's that? It's still available, but do we know, is it still legal to incorporate on fertilizer? Okay, so I'll try to do some more digging on that, but again, on Corteva's own website, it didn't show that that was an option anymore. But that was a good product as well. That's aminopyrrolid and metsulfuron methyl. And then we also have some other options out there that you may not know about that you can actually incorporate or blend onto fertilizer. Pendimethalin or Prowl H2O would be a real common pre that we can use that way. Variety of carriers can be used here. I think a lot of times, probably the biggest misnomer is that we have to use straight nitrogen, and that's not true. We can actually use a lot of different products in there. If you want to use DAP, potash, urea, or ammonium nitrate as a blend, you can. We're getting a lot of push in eastern Oklahoma. I'm interested to hear if y'all say the same thing out west on using some pelletized lime in these blends. Are y'all seeing any of that out west? No. Why would we want to use pelletized lime versus fertilizer? Yeah, cost of it. Okay, so we're looking at 180 to 220 a ton on pelletized lime. That's about half the cost of a lot of our commercial fertilizers. It does cheapen that up. I guess my argument to producers would be, even though we're cheapening that up, if we put 100 pounds of pelletized lime in there, we're now cutting down the amount of nitrogen that we're putting out, and we're not going to get the forage response that we were. So it's not like this carrier is a water carrier in a liquid application that's inert. We're getting forage yield from using this fertilizer, from using those nutrients. What? Yeah, I understand. There's some other concerns with pelletized lime, though, and the Prowl label raises this question. I have actually been working with a scientist, field scientist with Corteva the last couple of years with this question. Do we know what that does to the efficacy of the product when we blend it on pelletized lime? And I found this on the Prowl label. It says, do not impregnate Prowl H2O onto coated ammonium nitrate or limestone because these materials will not absorb the herbicide. If you do use it in a blend, then you still need to use 200 pounds of product, excluding the limestone that's included or the coated ammonium nitrate. So that means we would have to actually have more than 200 pounds of product. So this is an area I think we need more research, definitely an area we will continue to work on. All right, let's talk a little bit about some guidelines. I just kind of let you in on that one. Again, Zach says everybody knows this, but it is on the label that we have to have a minimum of 200 pounds of product per acre. Why do we do that? Why is that a requirement on the label? What's that? Exactly. It's simply for coverage. This safeguards the chemical companies and makes sure that we're getting a good distribution of those fertilizer prills. Again, it says it right on the label. And this is an example of 200 pounds of product per acre with urea. You can see there, we're getting pretty good coverage of the ground. So if each prill has herbicide coated onto the outside of it, as that dissolves, we get a nice barrier of that product that those weeds are going to actively take up. You start going lower rates and we lose some of that barrier. And I'll show you some data from that here in a few slides. I'm glad Dr. Galvin's not in here because I used mode of action improperly on the title of this slide. But again, I thought that's why I put it in quotes. That safeguards me. Usually need to use max or near max rate of these products. That's one thing that possibly to me is a downfall of DFI. We're going to be running much higher rates than what we could get away with a foliar application, especially if we're early in the summer. So if we're early May, we may be able to use half of the use rate we're normally going to blend on the fertilizer. Again, aminopyrrolate is our dominant active, and the thing to remember is we're getting very little leaf absorption from these products. Yes, we do get some as that prill travels on its way to the soil surface. As we hit those leaves, we do get some translocation of that chemical onto the leaf and absorption, but it's a very small amount. It's not enough to control those weeds. Most of this occurs through root uptake. And because we are relying on root uptake, and we're coating this herbicide on a prill of dry fertilizer, what do we also need to make this work? Rain. We've got to have rain. Okay, so much like what we talk about with a lot of our nutrients, we want a 1/2 inch of rainfall to move that into the root zone of the plant. Would be the same way with the herbicide, and we need that fairly quickly after application. Some of the residual activity can be good, but it also will diminish over time. That's one thing that we need to think about. I've talked with a few people on this just here in the last week. Soil disturbance is probably one of the biggest ones, and I'll show you some pictures of that here in just a minute. What would disturb the soil after an application of this? Hooves, hoof action, wheels, wheel tracks can be an issue, gophers, wild hogs. Those are areas where we really see we break that barrier and then we have potential for weeds to come right back in there. Again, that barrier weakens over time. We know the half-life of aminopyrrolid is about 75 to 90 days, but this is not for every species of weed. And this is the hardest one sometimes for producers to wrap their head around. Some species are more susceptible to aminopyrrolid. Some are much more resistant to that active. Again, the half-life itself is impacted by soil moisture, soil temperature, pH, essentially microbial activity in the soil. But here's the biggest one, weed species, okay? So if we look at something like Western ragweed, I don't know if Mike Johnson's still here, a long time ago, 12, 13 years ago, we did a lot of work on aminocyclopyrrochlor, and we were using aminopyrrolid as a comparative check, and we were applying that in February as a pre, and we were getting excellent weed control if we were looking at something like Western ragweed or bitter sneezeweed in May. So we're talking about 90 days of residual. If we start talking about a weed species such as woolly croton, anybody have any woolly croton? Much shorter residual when it comes to aminopyrrolid. It is less susceptible to aminopyrrolid. Give me an example of a plant that might be susceptible 12 months later after an aminopyrrolid application. That's a good one. Not the one I was thinking about, but absolutely. Tomato. Clover, white clover, okay? We know 12 months later, we're still going to get seedling death if we've applied aminopyrrolid there. So think about it that way. Every species of weed, there's a little bit of difference there in susceptibility, so that changes the length of time that we're going to get control. Am I going fast enough, Brian? Okay. Hot shot me if you need to. This right here, I think, surprises a lot of people, and that is how many states we now have 2 EE labels where we can impregnate herbicide on dry fertilizer. And I think this just goes to show how popular this is with producers, especially small producers, okay? Especially some of those producers that may only have 80 acres. They can't afford a spray rig. It's hard for them to rely on a commercial applicator to come out because commercial applicators running 80-foot booms and their property's got trees all on it. This is a great method for them to be able to get their fertility and herbicide put down at the same time. I think it's also enticing for companies because, again, that's a new market share of customers. Considerations for commercial blenders. For those of you in the room that might do this on a daily basis, you'll notice this picture I had on my title slide. That's a truck I had a few years ago at my place. Notice what that sign says on the back. Pasture only. Why do you think it says that? If we look at the literature, a lot of the literature, I don't know that it is stipulating that you have to do this, but it's very, very serious that, hey, if you are a blender that has any crop customers, you have to be extremely careful. And obviously that makes a lot of sense. There's lots of potential litigation there. If you send that truck out, and we just had a load of Grazon Next impregnated fertilizer, and now we've got another load of clean fertilizer, and we send it to somebody with soybean fill. There's a lot of issues there. So again, one of my good friends, he's actually the CEO of the co-op system in eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas. And what they do to get away from that, if you call and you're wanting fertilizer for crop ground, you're going to pick up that tender truck or buggy from Van Buren. If you are calling and you want DFI or even non-DFI for pasture, you're going to pick that up from the Fort Smith store. That way they keep everything separated. They don't have to worry about any cleanup, and there's no confusion from any of the employees about what has been clean or what has had herbicide mixed into it. But it is extremely risky. It is recommended to add dye to differentiate that from untreated fertilizer. And I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but I do see a lot of small mom and pop blenders that don't add the dye. And I had one of them tell me one time, well, it's easy to smell that it has herbicide on it. And I would agree. For Grazon Next HL, very, very unique smell, burns my sinuses. But has anybody used Duracor in this room? What's the smell of Duracor? Really doesn't have much smell. So it's very easy to have treated fertilizer there and not know that it's treated. That's why the dye is important. And that's why you see the blue in some of these pictures. You can add surfactant or methylated seed oil to that to improve coverage and sticking on those prills if you so desire. That is on label, and it is also recommended to use a drying agent to dry that back down. Once we get our blend done, that's going to be a little bit sticky. We can add a drying agent to that to dry it back up. I'll show you a couple pictures on that here in a minute, though, kind of a beware scenario. Some of the benefits does fit large or small, saves time and extra application costs with one trip across the field. And I think that's the big advantage to it for most people. Fewer weather delays. Here's the big one for me. I work with a lot of people that gripe and complain about wind. Getting herbicides put down timely because of wind. We live in Oklahoma. We have to worry less about wind when we're using this method. Now, I'm not saying we don't have to worry at all. If you get out there in a 60-mile-an-hour wind, it will blow those fertilizer prills too. But this would be a big one. Possibly the biggest reason that I recommend this to people now is for sensitive areas bordering fields that we want to be applying herbicides to. And this might be one of those crops that is not registered on the ODAF crop registry, sensitive crop registry. Everybody know what I'm talking about? Okay, we've had a lot of those pop up. This is a great way to essentially totally eliminate physical drift of particles. Okay, we don't have to worry about that at all. As long as you're not throwing that fertilizer into the intake vents on that greenhouse, you're good. Again, no spray equipment needed. No waiting on custom pesticide applicators. Some of the drawbacks. So here's the big one, and I'll show you a few pictures on this one too. You're really requiring rain within about 3 to 4 weeks. One thing that I'm working with the new field scientists with Corteva on is we're trying to look at photo degradation of that herbicide molecule when we're not getting rain. We know that's occurring. We just don't know how long we can get away with before that starts to be an issue. Doesn't work as well on large annuals, perennials, or brush species. Now, those products I showed you are really good perennial herbicides, and Chaparral is a really good brush herbicide, but it's not when we use it from a DFI standpoint, okay? And I'll show you some pictures that hopefully will help convince you of that. Will kill legume stands. Again, it's death on legumes. We're usually looking at about an 18-month plant back after using applications of aminopyrrolid. Does require a fairly large application of dry fertilizer. And I get it. There's some of us in this room that look at 200 pounds per acre and we don't think twice about that. But there are a lot of producers that have never fertilized before in their life and they're thinking 200 pounds per acre, that's $55, $60 an acre. Granddad paid 20 bucks an acre for this place. I'm not doing that. So again, it is mind-blowing for some producers. Can cause issues if held very long. Okay, so this is a picture that was a few years before the other one I showed you there. This is me not having fun on a Saturday using the one.
Good morning, Zach. Hold on just a second. Let me turn the zoom down. Can you hear me?
Wow.
All right. Oh, that's all right. Right.
I'm going to be honest. I was scared because I thought I got really deep right there, and I don't know why.
The 4% is advanced program.
We're picking something up.
And the 6%, 6% is on the prepaid discount that he's wanting. That I told him would be a 4%.
Hey. Any questions?
And they're very aware that the 4% advance program pays back in August. All they're concerned about is the prepaid discount right now.
Let's see, we keep on trucking. All right, put it up. We'll talk over it. I don't know if that's possible. Oh, well, we were pretty deep. Yeah, I'd go back to the you were shutting down? Okay, that's it. All right. All right. It's gonna be hard to follow that. You're almost there. You're almost there.
As a reminder to our Zoom participants.
All right. We're going to get right back at it here. Again, what you're looking at in this picture, this was blended on a Thursday morning, had dye added, had surfactant added, and then it had a drying agent put on it. It was trucked about 50 miles to my place Thursday at lunchtime, was parked under my hay barn until Saturday morning. And then when I get it out Saturday morning, the tender truck would not move anything. So again, that had set up in that amount of time. And that's usually a dangerous thing to do. I know, climb up on top of that, but it was hard. And I chipped the entire truck out. So again, that's something you need to think about. I would recommend you use it as quickly as possible after they do blend this, so you don't get into that situation. I had to throw some economics in here. I'm an agronomy guy, got a livestock background, but every decision I make, I always try to gear it back towards the economics of it, because that's what most producers really care about. Let's assume that we apply 200 pounds of urea at $425 a ton, and Grazon Next HL is $100 for 2 gallons. And honestly, it's probably going to be a little bit higher than that looking at this past year, unless somebody in here says, hey, I can get it to you cheaper than that. And I'm all ears. So again, broadcast application, 1.5 pints. We got $9.38 in the herbicide plus $8 application cost, about $17.50 per acre all told. Okay. Here's the big one with DFI, the fertility cost. You know, we're going to have $42.50 per acre in fertility. But oftentimes when I look at a DFI application, and when my ag economist looks at a DFI application, we're almost taking that as that's something we can't really put on this herbicide application because you're getting yield out of it. There's value in that, right? So again, you might want to knock that off. If you want to stick it in there, that's fine, because you're going to have a much larger cash outlay out of your pocket to do DFI. 2 pints of the product, which is what we need to run, $12.50. And then a lot of places are going to charge you a mix fee. And 10 years ago, they used to put on your ticket a mix fee, $3 a ton or $3 an acre or whatever it was. You won't see it now, but what you will notice if you back calculate, you're paying $16 or $17 for that Grazon Next HL that should only cost you $12.50. And the reason they do that is because they're adding dye, they're adding surfactant, they're adding drying agent, and then they've got this quote unquote, I call it a headache cost. It's a headache of having to go out there and blend that and then clean that equipment up at some point too. So really, if you compare those, put a little application cost on here too, we're fairly similar. To me, the biggest savings though is right down here. It's on equipment. All right. So it's less fuel, it's less wear and tear on that equipment, and that will save us some over the long term. All right. Last slide before I get into some pictures here, because everybody likes pictures. Details that are on the label. This one here, and I won't read every word and go through this, but I think this is an important point. This is on every one of those 2 EE labels that you'll find. And what you'll see there is the company is pretty much saying our recommended rates in this label are based on foliar applications in water. Okay, that doesn't mean you're going to see the same level of control when you impregnate that on fertilizer. So they're covering their tail, right? And that's understandable because we do see drastic differences in control on different species between foliar or DFI applications. If you do get some of those producers that are using a lot of fertilizer, maybe 300 pounds of product, 400 pounds of product or more, typically what we're going to recommend that you do is slurry that herbicide in some water so we get better coverage of the prills. All right, especially if you're only putting 2 pints. 2 pints is not quite enough to cover all those prills on 400 or 500 pounds. Here's the one that I see probably messed up the most. Very rarely does that get followed correctly, and that's the application. And if you look at all these labels, what they will tell you is to calibrate at half rate and have 100% overlap. And we do that for good distribution of those prills. We want good uniformity in the pasture. One of the issues, again, if we're thinking from a fertilizer standpoint, you're like, well, it doesn't matter if I've got light areas and heavy areas, it's all the same. But that's not true from a herbicide standpoint. We can actually have areas where maybe we cause crop injury or we fail to get adequate weed control. All right, let's talk a little bit about some research results here. I'm going to go sort of in a chronological order, I guess. I've got lots of trials and I just don't have time to go over all those today. But let's start here. This was a trial on woolly croton. Again, a little later in the year is when we applied this. We used urea and urea plus DAP as the carrier. The two on the left had no herbicide impregnated on them. The two on the right did. As you can see there, pretty decent job on woolly croton that had already emerged and was small. I think I'm going to change what you're thinking about woolly croton control here in a few slides. But if we get on it when it's small, it works very effectively. Control 30 days after, high 90% for those different treatments. You'll notice we started to lose control at 60 and at 90. This was a site where we did have some gophers show up in the back rep, the 4th rep of this trial, and essentially weed control went to nothing in that 4th rep. So if I knocked the 4th rep out, it still looked good 90 days later, but that's something that you do need to consider. This here was a trial. This is something that we really fight just on our eastern tier of counties in northeast Oklahoma, and that's poison hemlock. Tends to be real bad up through Adair, Delaware, Ottawa County. We also fight a lot of buckhorn plantain. Both of those species, DFI.
I know what your kid smells like and it stinks.
That's definitely not me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So you want me to stop? Okay. All right. So this was a trial University of Arkansas did in Benton County up around Bentonville. Again, I won't spend a lot of time here, but notice they went in, they sprayed. Now this is basically late winter when these applications are made on poison hemlock. 2,4-D at a quart, 95%. Met sulfuron at 0.3, Weed Master at 1 quart, P plus D at 1 quart, Grazon Next at 1 quart were all 100% control. Those were all foliar applications. Bounce down here to the bottom, we're going to look at a DFI application of Grazon Next on the fertilizer, 60% control of poison hemlock. And that is very close to what we see in the real world on producers' fields. Same thing with buckhorn plantain. Jennifer Patterson somewhere back there. We've had a few trials on buckhorn plantain too, where foliar is going to be the way to go. Now, this was not the only study they did. That same year, they had 18 different site studies. University of Arkansas conducted different weeds, different sites. They found their summary was that foliar spray was as good, if not better, than DFI on every site. Okay, let that sink in for just a second. As good, if not better, by using foliar. DFI was better on annuals than perennials. We would expect that. A lot of those perennials are tough to kill. We need to focus on proper timing and getting good root kill on that perennial to truly eliminate it from the system. Weed control decreased as annual weed size increased. And their rule of thumb was basically don't use it on perennials. And when the annuals get bigger than about 12 inches, we need to shift back to a foliar application. Okay. Anybody in here seeing similar results to that if you've got some experience with DFI? Now, there are exceptions to that. We can kill buttercup that's mid-thigh deep. I think I'm putting them to sleep. We need that other person to come back on and liven them back up. Yeah, we can kill buttercup that, again, is over 2 foot tall with an application of DFI. It's a fairly weak weed. but there's lots of weeds that we can't do that as they start to get some size. Here was a trial I had with Dr. Chad Cummins with Corteva. This was down at our research station at Valiant in McCurtain County back in 20 and 21. Really what we were assessing on this was different carrier rates of fertilizer. So looking at different amounts there. Am I over?
You got about 8 minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done. I got messed up here.
I'll give you some grace.
All right. So again, we looked at Grazon Next and Duracore at that high label rate at 100, 150, 200, and 250 pounds of urea. Won't spend a lot of time here. I will tell you the first year, the marsh elder was much larger than it was in year 2. Remember that as we bounce through the slides right here. Here was our year 1. We did see a significantly higher control as we increased the rate of carrier that we were putting out. And we did see slightly better control of marsh elder with Duracore. We also see the same thing with foliar trials. In year 2, it didn't quite play out that way. We saw much better control across the board. Why do you think that is? Those plants were anywhere from emergence to 4 inches tall when we put it out. So again, it's a smaller plant. It's easier to kill. We had much better control in year 2. There's an example again. Here's the check plot. Here's all these different treatments we put down, and you can still see some weeds in here, but again, we did a really good job of kind of cleaning that up. I'll bounce through this pretty quick. This was just a little demo that we had. Overgrazed site, lots of weeds, lots of different species here. We did put 216 pounds urea down and 2 pints of Grazon Next HL. So that's kind of the high end of that label. Applied on April 28th. There's 14 days later, we're already starting to see huge differences in species composition, huge differences in forage yield there. And then there's July 15th. You can see that croton has come up. How did we do on croton with that DFI application? Good. Here's a real producer field. Okay, 200 pounds urea plus 1.5 pints of Grazon Next HL applied on April 26th. They're mowing this here, a combination of Bermuda and Dallas grass. What do you notice right up there at the very top that might be a little bit off based on what we've talked about? Look right here. What did we say our typical rate for Grazon Next would be? 2 or 2.1 pints. We run 1.5 on this site. Looked really good mid-June. Here's August. Same field. Woolly croton. All right, so again, we run a lower use rate. That was not enough to pick up that woolly croton. Had we had late emerging cuckleburr or ragweeds, it would have picked those species up, but not on woolly croton. So that's one you really got to be careful with on DFI. Again, here was that same field that had been brush hogged down, starting to recover, but that is a prime example of a failure of DFI based on the species of weed and the timing until it emerges. And then the last one I'll show you here, this was our latest trial this year in McIntosh County. We were looking again at 3 different amino pyrrolid plus 2,4-D products. Lots of different weed species here. And we were comparing foliar versus DFI treatments. Okay, so here's the day we put the applications out. Lots of different species there, annuals and perennials. 7 days after, there's our check, getting good growth. There's our foliar application, already getting great control. Most annuals were totally gone at that point, totally controlled. Perennials were getting close to that point. There's our DFI. No rain, okay? 54 days after, we went mid-20 days until we got a rain on that site. Getting out of hand on the check plot. There's our foliar application. We had a lot of Johnson grass come in there. There's our DFI. DFI didn't look bad on the annuals, really, really weak on the perennials on that site, and the rain didn't help us. Again, here's an example. There's our check plot. Here's a foliar. Here's our DFI over here. We did get a little bit of forage release from the DFI, but just too many perennials on that site. So to kind of wrap this up here, foliar application on Western ragweed, we got 99% control. DFI, we got 55% control. It should have been much higher than that had we got rain within 2, 3, 4 days after application. The fact that we went almost a month hurt us quite a lot. We actually reapplied that trial right out to the side 40 days later. So much bigger Western ragweed, which would tell us we would expect less control, right? We actually improved our control about 30%. The reason is we got rain 12 days later. We got that active ingredient in the root zone faster. So I'm really going fast now. All right. There's my conclusions right there. Foliar applications begin working immediately. We don't get that luxury with DFI. Again, DFI has a place for annual weed control when weeds are small. It's not for perennials. It's not for large annuals. We need to be looking at foliar. Again, I like to just kind of close with this. Perception versus potential reality. Oftentimes when we think about spraying herbicides, that's what we're thinking. Same way with DFI. If you don't make sure you're doing everything right, we could end up over here. So I will tell you, both of these actually had DFI applications on. Did a really good job over here. Everything was perfect. Everything wasn't perfect on the right. We need to know our weeds, know the species and their susceptibility to that DFI application. We need to know the stage that they're at. And then we also need to think about the forecast. So if we're not seeing rain in the near future, we need to look at a foliar application. I didn't do too bad. I gave 7 minutes to that other guy.
We have time for questions for Brian.
Applying with the do. Yeah, and again, I didn't allude or didn't elaborate on some of that, but yeah, absolutely. Like for instance, with buttercup and even with that plot right there on the western ragweed, within a couple days, we were seeing lots of curling, lots of epinasty on those plants. We were obviously seeing contact from those prills as they hit the ground, causing some injury. We do see with dew, again, that's enough to kind of dissolve that prill and get some of that chemical on the surface of the soil, but it's not near as good as having a full rain. And with weed species like buttercup, I've actually seen, and I've had trials where I had foliar treatments and DFI treatments, and we get a rain within, say, 12 hours. 48 hours later, the DFI will burn down faster than what we see with a foliar application. So I think the nitrogen helps that process speed up a little bit if the timing of the rain is perfect.
I just have a little watch out, and we've been doing it at Banner Co-op for about 9 years. And we treat a lot and put them in buggies for people to go do their own. They usually go fertilize their pasture and think it's a good idea to go through their yard. They killed lots of apple trees and things like that. So we really try to coach them that it's too harsh for lawns.
Yeah.
So just to watch out.
Yes, I can. Absolutely. So I actually had a few of those trials this year. I don't have data up. We had woolly croton's one that Corteva is really interested in. We had midsummer applications. I will tell you about the best that we saw, even running up to 300 pounds of product per acre, 2.1 pints of Grazon Next HL, 55% was about the best control we've got on that trial this summer. So timing is still super critical, even using a stout herbicide. And at that time, 1.25 pints of Grazon Next foliar would be enough to pick those woolly croton up. So it's just, again, it's very important that we capitalize on timing. Horse nettle and silverleaf nightshade, what you're typically going to see, we don't get great root kill. We can get top burn down. I actually had that right there on that slide. I had Carolina horse nettle listed on that one. You've already locked me out, hadn't you? Okay. Yeah, I know. So again, you know, when we got rain properly, we were getting a lot of top kill on those plants, but not true root kill. It would come back the next year. No, nothing that late. I don't know that I would typically recommend that late of an application.
What would be the cutoff date for your last application?
Depends on the weed.
Good answer.
Yeah. I'll give you the ag econ answer. It depends, right? No, I would say for annual weeds, again, once I'm starting to get 12 to 15 inches, I'm going to shift to foliar. I really think that's where we need to just go back to a spray rig. No, that's all done by hand in small plots. Yeah. And that's why it's so sharp. He said the lines on those plots were super sharp. It's just because I'm an excellent researcher. I mean, no,
You've been
when we
feeding
go
the
in on
chickens
the
a long
small
time.
plots, we're blending based on the actual square footage of the plot. That way we know we have the exact right amount of herbicide and the right amount of fertilizer, and then we spread right to that edge.
By the way, if anybody wants to try that out, we got lots of opportunity across the state to learn how to feed the chickens properly.
Yep. Actually, a lot of times it's better than a whirlybird spreader. Okay.
Mike, did I see your hand?
Oh, I got another.
How was the fertility on the plot before you did your DFI?
Inherent soil fertility, soil test.
Yes.
What? Okay. So all the data I showed you today, I didn't present any yield data, and I do have a lot of that data on these sites, but we are talking Eastern Oklahoma. So most of those are going to be probably 2 on the P index, maybe 1. Nobody even laughed at that. They're going to be very low on
Very
phosphorus, probably low pH, mid 5s, something like that. That's the average site that we're seeing. That really good fill there, it's over a 6 pH. Phosphorus is good. Potassium's good. It's been poultry littered a lot in the past, so variable. Oh, you can use NP. From a herbicide standpoint, it does not necessarily matter if what the combination of urea, DAP, or potash is from a herbicide standpoint. It will change your yield of the forage that you see, though. And I still say that is part of why we see some suppression of growth is we're getting good competition from the forage. You know, we don't need to forget about that part. It's not just herbicide control. It is the fact that we're getting competition from the Bermuda grass.
All right.
Okay. I've exhausted
You're
my
good.
time.
If you can load my.
Thank y'all. Yes. I missed the last part. 4% discount in August.
Go ahead and all right. Our next speaker wants to shift south from the northeast to the southeast, and our southeast area agronomist, Mr. Mike Trammell. We want to go into talk a little bit about fescue and how far west can we push it.
So some of you may know me before coming to Extension. I was the forage breeder at Noble for about 20 years. And before that, I did about 10 years of forage extension at the University of Nebraska. So when I came to Oklahoma, and being from Oklahoma, I always had a lot to do with fescue and done a lot of research over the years. So the first question I'm going to ask you, kind of like Brian, he's got a question. Does anybody know that guy? No, that gentleman's name is Mr. Alva Simpson. He's passed away now, but the reason I asked that is over the years, I went to 2 international meetings overseas. I happened to be in Zurich, Switzerland. I stick up this slide and I hear somebody out there go, I know that guy. And like 2 months later, I was in another place and I'm like, just out of curiosity, does anybody know this guy? And some guy in the back raised his hand. Yeah, that's Mr. Simpson. So this guy never left the state of Alabama in his life, but he did not know how well known he was across the world. And anyway, we'll talk a little bit about his pasture here in a minute. There was actually some historic research on fescue done on this gentleman's pasture. So we'll talk a little bit about the role of endophytes in summer dormancy and tall fescue across the state of Oklahoma. So an estimated acreage of about 30 to 40 million acres of tall fescue in the United States. It's a great forage grass, for grazing animals, pasture, hay, haylage, an important conservation and turf plant as well. And really, love it or hate it, it's still the best adapted perennial forage grass we have, especially in the state of Oklahoma for our area. And going back in the first half of the 20th century, especially as we start out east, a lot of producers didn't really have a forage program. There was a lot of overgrazing. Most of the forage base was warm season based. There was some small grains planted. There was a lot of cereal rye planted, or what was known as poverty grain for the folks who could not afford wheat seed. A lot of erosion. A lot of areas, looked like this, had a lot of gullies, a lot of poor soil, etc. So a forage was well in demand in these areas. And this gentleman comes along. This is Mr. William Suter. He happened to purchase some farm ground in the state of Kentucky. One of these farms that he purchased, he actually lived on, came known as the William Suter Farm. This is actually a picture of that farm. This is a hillside on that farm. It's very green. This was taken in the wintertime. That whole hillside is what? Tall fescue. But at the time, they were unfamiliar what this was. A lot of people in the area would come to this farm to look at this hillside saying, boy, the whole state is brown. This guy's got this green hillside. What is this grass? It comes back every year. They wasn't quite sure what it was, but this guy was getting grazing when a lot of other people were not. This gentleman here comes along. This is Mr. Fergus. He was a forage specialist there at the University of Kentucky. Looked at this grass, finally identified it as tall fescue, which was native to Europe. So the question was, how did it get here? Well, the best, if you kind of read kind of his research notes, the best they could probably come up with was that sometime, probably when some immigrants came over into that area, the ladies, when they were bringing their stuff overseas, they would pack their dishes in boxes and use crop fodder for protection to keep the dishes from breaking. And they think probably one of these boxes had tall fescue fodder in it, and it was dumped, and later that seed spread and actually covered that hillside. But this was kind of the one location. Out of that 30 to 40 million acres of tall fescue we have in the United States can all be traced to that hillside right there, every bit of it. And this was very important because this actually, some folks recognize this as a cool season option that we could use. So Mr. Fergus, he identified that grass, cultivated some seed. He went and looked at that farm in 1931. He's in the state of Kentucky, thus the name Kentucky 31 is how that came about. There's actually a plaque on that hillside. If you're ever in Kentucky, Menifee County, you can stop by there, look at this plaque, and it's actually a historical marker that they keep there on that farm. So that's the origin of Kentucky 31 in the United States. This fellow came along, Mr. Johnstone. He was also a forage specialist there in the state of Kentucky. He actually promoted the use of it, started increasing seed, getting a lot of producers in the area to use it, actually started going across state lines, actually got in with the Soil Conservation Service. They started picking it up, planting it in some of these eroded areas. So this gave producers actually now a warm season and a cool season base that they could use. He actually won several awards for that work. And it, some folks called it Suter grass, but over time, this actually got so popular, people just referred to it as the wonder grass. They would actually buy a bag of seed. I haven't got a picture of it, but at home, I got an old bag, tall fescue bag, a burlap bag that seed was brought in, and it doesn't say tall fescue on it, it just says wonder grass. But that's actually original tall fescue seed bag. And a lot of these states were distributing seed out of here, out of Kentucky. People started kind of brown bagging it, selling it to their neighbors. It was really moving fast. A lot of people got upset. And if you ever read about the history of tall fescue, they actually had some pretty good gunfights, and some towns fought other towns over the right to certain seed fields and everything, believe it or not, over tall fescue seed. But anyway, green through most of the winter, gave folks a long grazing season, fairly persistent, tolerant of a lot of abuse. They got to see high production yields, high seed yields, so they could move seed around. And more importantly, it started being promoted by the Soil Conservation Service for erosion control, and kind of really spread from that standpoint. This dark area here is what we refer to now as the tall fescue belt. This is kind of the primary area where tall fescue is really growing. You can see as we get over into Oklahoma, far eastern counties, we see a lot. And Brian and Pugh will tell you, if you can grow a pecan tree at the bottom, you probably got tall fescue under it. As we move over toward I-35, we start getting into these drier areas. Then we get into an area we'll talk about here in a little while in the western areas. It's for a different type of fescue. But fescue was beginning to get out there and get used, we started seeing these reports, especially like this: tall fescue grass is poison for cattle. There was a lot of research reports coming out. Something's wrong. Something's out there, going on with these cattle. They're still gaining some weight, but maybe they don't look as good as they should. Starting seeing different issues. And this went on for a while. And there were some gentlemen at a conference in Kentucky, and they got together. They knew of a fescue farm not too far from there where there was actually a trial going on, and they wanted to go look at it because this farmer had called them and said, "Hey, something's going on out here you need to come and look at." And they went out to this farm, and this is actually their picture, their handheld notes that they drew on this farm. You can see they wrote under pasture 4, toxic, pasture 2, non-toxic, unknown toxicity. They could recognize by the cattle in here in these pastures that something was going on. But they also recognized what was going on in these other pastures where they wrote non-toxic, that something wasn't going on, and they couldn't figure out what the difference was. But they knew it had to be something going on with the fescue itself. They ended up talking with that producer. Remember that picture I showed you earlier of Mr. Alvy Simpson? He actually had some of this farm. They asked him about it because they had provided him the Kentucky 31 seed to plant on this farm. He had planted it, every bit of it, except for this pasture, and this one. Started raining, couldn't get it done. He asked about it. They said, put the seed in the barn, plant it next year. So he did. It all come up, put cattle on it. He said, I don't know what's going on, but the pastures down here, the cattle look really bad, but they look really good up here on these other pastures. And that was kind of an indication to these researchers that it had to be something probably with the seed. And they asked him what he did with it. He said, I stored it in the barn all summer. After looking at that seed, this gentleman here at the bottom actually found the first endophyte living in that seed. He also determined that by storing in that barn, the heat and the humidity in that barn over the summertime killed the endophyte in that seed and actually created seed that was endophyte free. Thus, it had no toxicity for those cattle. They actually did some later studies to confirm that, where they showed toxic pastures that were 94% endophyte and animals on endophyte free or 5% less endophyte, had higher weight gains and stuff like that to verify that research. And so that was a big deal there for determining that. And they like to put plaques up. They actually put a plaque up on that one too. So that was another historic pasture research done at Alabama on that, determining about the endophyte. So this is the endophyte. These are the plant cell walls here. You can see the endophyte mycelia grows in between those cell walls within the plant. It's a symbiotic relationship. That endophyte provides that tall fescue plant protection from mammalian herbivory. We'll talk about that. Some insect resistance, drought tolerance, and in return, that endophyte, helps with the nutrients in that plant. This is the endophyte here. You can see growing up through the plant. This is the little stained blue lines. You see the mycelia actually grows up into the seed head. It is transmitted through the seed. So if you have an endophyte-free plant growing next to an endophyte plant that has an endophyte, they don't transfer back and forth. It's only transferred in a seed. Endophyte-free plant's going to produce endophyte-free seed. These are some of the compounds that endophyte produces. Lolines helps with drought and insect deterrence. Paramines, a natural insecticide. We get into the ergot alkaloids. These are some of the derivatives that can cause problems with our livestock while they're out there grazing. This is kind of a laundry list that toxic fescue can cause. We can see fescue foot, vasoconstriction, overheating in the animals, loss of switches, different things like that. Fescue foot's probably the most common. Retained hair coat, just a rough look. The University of Missouri actually looked at a lot of pastures, tall fescue pastures over several different states, and looking through pastures that were high endophyte compared to low toxic endophyte. And they looked at that loss of weight gain, and they come up with the number of high endophyte cost about little less than a pound per day on average per animal. So, you know, it's kind of one of those deals that if you don't have the ability to weigh cattle on your farm, you never knew what you were actually losing over time. Here's an example of an animal that's been grazing on endophyte-free fescue compared to one that's been grazing on toxic. This animal's been overheating. It's been around a water source in the mud trying to cool off. A lot less grazing, rough hair coat. So Dr. Carl Hovland used to be a forage specialist at Auburn. He's like, well, this is simple. We'll just do endophyte-free tall fescue. So he started removing the endophyte through the seed using heat and humidity. And this is where he started getting the terms, you know, everybody referring to Kentucky 31 or wild type endophyte seed compared to endophyte free. This is a old picture, but his original picture of one of his plots with the cultivar Jessup tall fescue. This is Jessup with a wild or toxic endophyte. Pretty good grass stand there, looks pretty good. This is one with the endophyte removed, same cultivar, a lot lower grass production, kind of with some yellowing, doesn't look as good, a little bit of weeds in there. So they started to recognize that the loss of that endophyte was causing some issues as well. They were losing that ability to persist in the environment. This shows it a different way in a scenario where they put continuous grazing. You can see that the toxic endophyte over time had higher stands compared to the endophyte free over time. So they were losing those stands. So they're kind of stuck in a catch-22 situation with the endophyte. Dr. Joe Boughton on the right there used to be at the University of Georgia. He met this gentleman on the left, Gary Latch, who's actually a New Zealander. They met at a conference and Joe was telling him, said, hey, you know, we got these varieties of fescue that are really good, but, you know, we to take the endophyte out of them and then they just fall apart. So Gary Latch, he's like, well, I got some endophytes that they produce all the good stuff. You know, they insect resistance, drought tolerance, but they don't produce any of this stuff that's causing issues with our cattle. And he said, I can do you one better. He said, I think I could even put them into your plants that you're working on. And so they developed that idea of putting a friendly endophyte into these tall fescue plants. And this is kind of the way it's done. They can actually, this is the endophyte mycelia grown on a petri dish. They'll take a plant, a fresh seedling, germinated seedling here. And you do this under a microscope and you can wound that plant, place a little bit of the mycelia right here on the wound, and it actually takes and infects the wound and infects the plant. That plant is now infected with an endophyte. The seed that plant will produce will be infected with that endophyte from that point on. This is very tedious work. My wife used to do this. She could do 20 in about 10 hours. It takes a little bit of time to do. I'm too nervous. I'd be cutting my finger off and some other things there. But anyway, it takes a long time to do. You know, if you were doing 100 plants to produce seed to start with, it takes a while to get there. So this is where the Max Q, the first novel endophyte, came from, endophyte friendly. Here's an example looking back, kind of same deal. Here we have green, the toxic endophyte, the friendly endophyte on persistence, and you can still see the endophyte free just tanks off. Those plants just don't hold up. So we were seeing that persistence come back with that friendly endophyte, but none of the issues with our cattle now. If we look at weight gains, this was some studies done out in Louisiana on some stockers. We get down here at animals, 2.01 pounds per day average daily gain on toxic. Jump that up to an extra pound per day on Max Q endophyte. Same way here, this is out of Calhoun, Georgia, steers versus heifers, toxic, non-toxic. We can see those weaning weights are much higher on the novel endophyte fescue. So now we've added a new term in here. Now if we talk about novel or friendly endophyte, we're talking about these friendly endophytes. Now there's a whole bunch. ARC Plus is one developed by the University of Arkansas. E34 is a Barenbrug product. We got Max Q, Max Q2, and Protect. These are all friendly endophytes. No compounds produced that are causing issues with our animals, but we get the the benefits of drought tolerance and some other things along with them. And you can kind of see on this deal, if we talk about common, novel, and endophyte free, common toxic issues with our livestock, but it is drought tolerant and very persistent, where we get into the novel tall fescue, safe for livestock, still competitive and drought tolerant. Endophyte free, safe for livestock, but very sensitive to our management and drought situations, especially in this area. My experience with endophyte free, it does great in what I call softer environments. If we start like going north of Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin, places a little bit more rainfall, cooler environments, does quite well. I've seen very few endophyte free pastures in Oklahoma or Arkansas that have stayed around for any length of time. And if they do, it's because they got a very, very, very good manager with a very, very good grazing program. So I just kind of put this together. This is all of the, unless they've come out with some here lately, this is all of the friendly endophyte fescues that are on the market. Here's Kentucky 31 just as comparison. Lots of different varieties. I'll tell producers, I'll kind of ask a little bit about their production scheme. What are they trying to do? Some of them are better for certain areas, northern fescue belt. Some of them are kind of all around. Bar Optima is a soft leaf. That's a different twist there on something. Some of them are late and early maturing. I tell producers a lot, shop for cost. What's cost out there, what fits your budget better for those. Now we'll talk a little bit about something that's different. And I got it in this green box, and that's endophyte free summer dormant going in. That's what we call Mediterranean area of adaptation. So if we go back to that fescue belt, now we're looking at areas kind of west of I-35, actually into California, like the Imperial Valley and other places. And what makes this different, if we look at Oklahoma, I call it the I-35 effect. Basically, as we start going, we talked about all our continental or tall fescues over in eastern Oklahoma in these higher rainfall environments. But as we go west and that rainfall gradient drops off steeply, Kentucky 31 type fescues will just not persist. And this is where we can start breaking them into two types. So whole first part of this talk, I've talked about summer active or continental tall fescue. Originates from Europe. Grows during the summer with adequate soil moisture and moderate temperatures. And of course, we know it grows through the winter. But now we'll look at summer dormant or Mediterranean tall fescue. Originates from the Mediterranean basin. Exhibits dormancy through summer, and it has the potential to persist in areas with hot and dry summers. So that sounds like most Oklahoma most of the time. And phenotypically, they should really probably be two different species. If you look on the left, this is a Mediterranean type tall fescue. This is a Kentucky 31 type. Notice how thinner the leaves are. A lot different look to them. From a distance, I've had people say, "Oh, it's ryegrass." No, it's a Mediterranean type tall fescue. So what is summer dormancy? Basically, it's a temporary suspension of growth in the plant, whether that's leaf sheaths or leaves. That plant just stops growing. But it's also an adaptive response to long day lengths and high temperatures. So you think, what kicks that plant into dormancy? The photo period is what kind of sets the trigger for the plant to be ready to go dormant. Then as we get into high temperatures going into summer, that kicks the plant into dormancy. As we come out of summer and those day lengths get shorter, then that brings that plant back out of dormancy. And it is kind of acknowledged as a drought resistance trait. Kind of as a comparison, if we look at Mediterranean, we're talking about high survival in drought-prone environments, better regrowth in these environments, and better persistence compared to our summer active types. Another reason that I was interested in it when I worked on it was this here. Everybody remember 2011? Everybody like to forget 2011? Yeah, so, from my experience as a plant breeder, I had some really good stuff, I thought, until this happened. Then even the good stuff looked bad if it survived at all. So I started really getting interested in the Mediterranean material. And this is a trial I run. This was actually down at Ardmore. So this is a mix of small plots of fescues. Some of them are the Continental or Kentucky 31 types we've been talking about, like Max Q and Bar Optima. And then there's some Mediterranean, the summer dormant types in this trial. They all look very good right now. This is a spring. 2012 summer was not much better than 2011. This is what it looked like. And I grazed it. I grazed it hard. In fact, I took my supervisor out there and he's like, well, I think you're done on this trial. And I was like, yeah, I think this just went a little over the edge. So we got into fall and we got our first rainfall, and this is what I seen. All those summer dormant types just kicked right back out of it. So this, you know, when it comes to like breeding work and stuff, this was as black and white as you can get on seeing a trait express itself. So out of that, we developed some summer dormant tall fescue. This is an example of a pasture here. This was actually out in the Vashti, Texas area. You can see it looks very nice in the spring. This is what it looked like in the summer when it goes dormant. People will say, hey, it's dead. No, it's alive. It's just its mechanism for going dormancy. Remember, it has no endophyte. It does not need any endophyte for that. This was persistence. I just kind of grouped it. I had like 20 continental types of fescue in with that trial. Of course, they all pretty much died at Ardmore, Vashti, Texas. But the summer dormant types, you can see the persistence was night and day on it, 80% on average or above compared to below 10% on the other types. Yields were good too. So we were looking up around 4,000 pounds per acre, dry matter per acre across these different sites on a 3-year average. So we were doing some pretty good tonnage. If you can produce that kind of tonnage at Vashti, Texas, you're doing pretty good. This was some work our agronomist at Noble did when I was there, comparing summer dormant type to graze out wheat. On average, he was initiating grazing with the summer dormant fescue about a little after the middle of October, terminating going into summer about mid to late May. He was average getting on wheat about mid-December, coming off toward the end of April. Average daily gain was about not too different on that compared to wheat. And as you kind of, at the time, this is the value of gain. And I'm not an economist, but we go down to net return. We were gaining actually a little bit of money on the summer dormant fescue. And a lot of that was coming from, we only had to plant it once. Once we got past that first year of establishment, then we didn't have to look at that seed cost and establishment time. This was offering producers a perennial forage option in those areas where maybe they were relying on a winter annual. So to kind of summarize some things here, your novel entonite tall fescues, there's a lot of them out now. They all do quite well in eastern Oklahoma. There's some variations on the twist of traits, like, well, they're all persistent. Yeah, but maybe you want one that's soft leaf. Maybe you want one that's later maturing or early maturing, and then shop for that price point. Endophyte freeze, there's some pretty good ones out there. But like I said, we're in a stressful environment anyway in state Oklahoma. Most of them don't last very long, maybe a few years of persistence. They tend to do better in our northern environments. And then the Mediterranean types, when I first started working with it, I was only looking at them to go maybe west of I-35. Now there's quite a bit in New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle and Imperial Valley and Utah. I actually looked at a pasture the other day at Boswell, Oklahoma, and one at Kiowa. So producers are actually taking it back east, which I find different, but they like the drought protection, I guess, it offers. So with that was a quick history of fescue, I promise you. I'll take any questions on that. It's you can put glyphosate over it. So as long as it's dormant. Yeah, you can put glyphosate over it in the summertime when it's dormant. Just make sure it's dormant. So
do you know if they have a like a Mediterranean turf type fescue?
I know it's being worked on. I just don't know where it's at from that standpoint. But it's attractive from that standpoint because of the finer leaf on that.
I guess my question would be, what's the cost difference between the novel endophyte and then the summer dormancy?
So the novel endophyte, when they first come out, it was kind of a hard sell. You know, you were looking at seed that was probably $7 or $8 a pound. Comparing Kentucky 31 seed, you could go buy for $1.50 a pound. And I don't know about anybody in this room, but if you dumped out a bag of Kentucky 31 and a bag of Texoma Max Q2, I can't tell them apart. They look the same to me. You plant them, I probably still can't tell them apart until I actually apply my grazing management to it. And so that's a hard sell for a producer when I can't see that trait. I don't know what you say. I'm buying a trait. I don't see it. So now that seed price has dropped, once people more understand it, you're probably looking at about, a $60 to $70 an acre establishment cost going to a novel endophyte fescue compared to probably about 40 for a Kentucky 31. But the other thing is seed companies recognize producers didn't want to pay for that trait. Now, when you buy a bag of novel endophyte fescue, it'll have, besides the seed tag, with the purity and the germination and all that on it, it'll have a tag on it from the Grassland Renewal Alliance. That is a tag saying this bag has been tested and we guarantee this bag has 70% more viable endophyte or higher. So, the last thing you want to do is go buy a bag of tall fescue seed that you paid quite a bit of money for and the endophyte's all dead. You don't know it. You wouldn't know if it's dead or not, but they will guarantee that bag, it's been tested. It'll have a date of test. All that's done out of Oregon now, just like a lot of the other seed production where it's ryegrasses and fescues are produced. If anybody's looking to buy tall fescue seed and plant that's novel, make sure you're ready to go and ready to plant when you go buy that seed. The last thing you want to do is buy it and store it for any length of time and take the chance for losing that endophyte in that seed.
Have you worked with any producers like doing dual purpose with Bermuda, or will the fescue usually choke out the Bermuda or vice versa?
So, I get that question a lot. Usually Bermuda is going to take over. Eventually, you'll get some sporadic plants in there. It depends what you want. My pastures at home, I can manage Bermuda and fescue kind of together, but you kind of have to stay on top of it with fertility and timing of grazing. That can be done with Mediterranean, but I think it's better done with something like crabgrass or something putting over the top than that. So Bermuda is just a little too aggressive. But crabgrass fits quite well. I've had some folks plant cowpeas, some warm season legumes, cover crop type mixes over the top of it. As far as like forage quality so actually that fine leaf fescue, that Mediterranean is I don't have the slide up here, but it's actually quite a bit high in crude protein. Just that fine leaf material, it's very lush. Quite a bit higher than the Kentucky 31 types, which tend to be pretty coarse if you feel them. So
this may be a dumb question or because I wasn't paying attention, but what month, will it go dormant based on the day length, and will good growing conditions delay its dormancy?
So it's not, photoperiod sets it up to go dormant, but if we get into a situation where we may have high temperatures, but we have a lot of moisture, it's not obligate to go dormant. I've actually seen it stay green, but in most of the time, that's not very common for what we do. I've seen it go dormant for a month and come right back out of dormancy.
Any other questions?
Once you say like you wanted to have the fight freak or do the fight, you wanted to go to the other. That either fight will never cross over.
So that's a very common question. I'll go out on some visits where somebody's taken out a Kentucky 31 pasture and maybe they put in a novel endophyte or an endophyte free. And they'll say, well, the one I went to recently, it was an endophyte free. And they said, we had it tested and there's a lot of endophyte out here. And probably several things happened. One, they never got rid of all the Kentucky 31 to start with. But what I got into, I seen 2 hay feeders sitting out there and I'm like, what are you feeding for hay? Tall fescue, where's it coming from? This other pasture I got over here, what is it? Kentucky 31. It was all the seed being brought back over. So, but they won't cross. You know, if you have a novel endophyte plant, it won't cross pollinate with a, you know, if it's novel endophyte to start with, that's the type of endophyte it's going to produce.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Trammell. So we're going to keep on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, and I'm going to present this. If anybody has a problem, I guess the answer will be no. We're going to have box lunches, and I'm not going to say they're ready, but they'll be ready very soon. You might have a problem with shorten lunch break up to 30 minutes and rolling into the session at least 12:45. Anybody got any problems? Yes? Okay. Okay. All right. Grads don't count on their answers. So moving in, I'm going to step by you, Dave, see if we can't get this thing to kick off and find me. The AI is almost too smart. So it found me? No, found me? There we go. All right. Now I can move. Correct? Follow? All right. Okay. So I'm going to hit a couple topics and I think Aubrey pretty handled. I mean, Pew does a great job of covering fertility. Not going to go too much in this, and going to hit a couple concepts, a couple thoughts, and really some directions we're going, and some overarching recommendations I'm making that are not 100% backed in research yet, but I would say that it's a direction that we should be thinking larger scale and moving into that. So, forage fertility, getting into this. I'm bringing this up because we've really got to think about it. We look at our removal and how we're managing our systems, and I bring this up. This is our our intensified our production systems. We look at fescue, and I'm really hitting on the case side. That's where I want you to be thinking. Fescue's pulling 54 pounds of K per ton. We go into our Bermuda 43. We should know y'all are CCAs, you're educators, you're in that our forage systems are heavy K pullers. And yeah, that is a hay system, but even if you're running it through the gut system of an animal, there's still quite a bit of potassium extraction. So just because we're not pulling off bales and sending them down the road doesn't mean we're not pulling heavily on that potassium on the system. Okay. So as we keep that in mind and where I want to go, we're going to move through that. If you haven't seen this slide, you've never seen me talk. And if you've never seen me talk, shame on you. So, but this is all the same. I take this all crops, and I'm not going to spend an hour on this because Raiden knows I could talk this one slide for an hour. This is a slide I'll go to. If y'all invite me to your county, I could do this slide for the entire talk. I don't have to move beyond it. It's okay. Soil test first and foremost. We get out of that on the forage systems. We see the forage system as being the system that doesn't need investment. We're low cost. I don't want to spend that money. I'm not spending that dollar or that $10 bill at Swaffle. I'm sorry. We got to get out of that in the system. And I'm looking, and everybody in here knows, but we've got to be doing a better job. And I want to push, if you're even half of a manager, send 2 per field, because there ain't a flat forage field in the state of Oklahoma. Not many. You get out west and they're flat. They also aren't growing anything out there. You've got slope, you've got side slope, you've got bottoms. Break it up into 2 points, break it up into 3 points. We can do better job managing forages in Oklahoma and not spending that much money. Cody, I'll try to get them to spend money with you, but we don't have to spend that much money to do it right. And the breaking of a Bermuda grass field, I am the precision ag guy. It doesn't take a genius to break a pasture into two fields, side slope and bottom. really weedy, not that weedy. It doesn't have to be really a high-end, high-tech management system that we're breaking that field into zones. Take it. There's probably a reason that bottom's got a really good Bermuda grass stand, but woolly croton is taking over this other patch. Don't sample them together. Take two, and I know it's going to cost you $20 instead of $10, but we should look at that. Soil pH. This is the base of all things we should start with. This is something that I push heavily. This is something I'm trying to better understand. I've got some data. We won't go too heavily into it, but soil pH on established Bermuda grass pastures, I have been changing it. I've been looking at it. I've got 4 or 5 patches that, I'm thinking Midland, they're at least 15, if not 20-year-old stands. The pHs are 4.7 to 5.1. I'm changing the pH up to 6, and I can't change the production. You're telling me you're sprigging, you're going to spend that money on sprigs, you're going to spend that money on seed. I can show you a difference between a good pH sprigging and seeding versus a poor pH on that establishment. I am not seeing the significant increase in yield production when we're moving an old stand into better pHs. I will say you can significantly influence your herbicide activity moving from a 5.2 to a 6. And I think that, our herbicides are not cheap. Do you want just your herbicide that you're dropping $17 an acre on to work better? There might be value in that over time. If I can increase my herbicide effectivity, if I can increase my herbicide residual activity, start producing more, and the production comes from better weed control than it necessarily does to the just forage production. I also tell you the phosphorus will be it's more responsive to phosphorus when we bring that pH up. That phosphorus that you're paying, that you hurt to pay for, has value. Brian knows exactly why I said I don't like the idea of using pale lime as a carrier. Might as well use water. 100 pounds of pale lime, I know there's 6 in here that won't like me, is worthless. It is nothing more than a carrier. Use pale lime, use pellets, whatever. Use feed. Hell, go buy bulk feed if you get it cheaper than the pale lime and use that at 200 pounds of product, because it will do more for your soil than 100 pounds of pale lime. Fact. Y'all can be angry with me all you want, but pale lime, unless you start applying 1,000 to 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of pale lime per acre per year or per acre at one shot, does nothing. We got plenty of data you'll see. pH is a mass balance issue. You have to have thousands of pounds of calcium and thousands of pounds of oxygen to change pH. 100 pounds of Pell's not going to do it. 200 pounds of Pell's not going to do it. P and K, the things we keep forgetting, and I'll go back and I'm going to hit this later, is that we start talking about forages, and I think Brian's seen everybody use urea is the first thought. I got Bermuda grass, I'm going to put on urea before I spend money on anything else. Brian joked with y'all and you didn't laugh about 1 ppm, 2 ppm phos fields. That ain't a joke. I got too many Bermuda grass patches that have 2 ppm phosphorus and 20 pounds potassium and wondering why they aren't producing much. By the way, that's low. For those of you who haven't figured that out, I want 30 ppm phos and 150 ppm K. 1 and 10 are not enough. Don't go putting out 200 pounds of urea, 300 pounds of urea, thinking that's going to save the day when I got 1 and 10 on my P and my K. Phosphorus is the energy house. That's what gets that plant going. That's what creates energy. That's what creates root growth. We got to have phos in the system to get that. Potassium, you want that stand to survive more than a year or two? That potassium is critical when it comes to winter survivability of our perennial systems and getting them through winter and drought. By the way, you want to start talking about dry, cold winters combined, kicks the stand if we don't got good K. And so I know we've been talking a lot of Eastern stuff and we got a whole lot of Western Oklahoma folks. Have we had dry, wet winters and cool springs where our springs haven't kicked off and got going recently in the last 5 years? Answer is yes. How's our Bermuda grass green up been, excluding maybe this last spring? How quickly is Bermuda grass kicking up and going in the springs of the last couple of years? Not. Huh? It might in March or April. Our annual weeds, those little downy brums, all those little annual weeds that have been kicking us in the springs because the Bermuda grass hasn't taken off, that also is hurting our longevity of those stands, and it makes it worse if we don't have the potassium in the system. We got to think. That's why I go back to that recovery. Nitrogen and everything else is secondary. Law of the minimum, go back. Stop throwing on urea if your soil test is in the trash. Fix other things. The yield's limited, going to move through this. This just goes to say, the only thing this is up here is say that our fields are variable. We know that. Spend an extra $10. Get 2 samples to pasture. I don't care if it's a 10-acre patch or 100-acre patch. That fertilizer cost is enough. And you can tell the spinner spreader to do things 1 rate, 2 rate, 1 pass, 2 pass. There are low tech ways that we can do variable rate application. It doesn't take a lot, and you don't have to have the newest of all spreaders. You can do it with a spinner truck, and even that driver that may. Anyways, we'll just not talk about some of our spinner truck drivers. Thank you for laughing. We have a lot of variability in our soils. Let's kind of look at that and break through it and see how can we do better. And a lot of folks I know, just 1 sample is a huge improvement over the 0. That is 100-fold improvement. Let's go to 1. Not every acre every year. It's getting a five-year rotation. Do 10 to 20% per year. Move for this. Just looking at some work we've done. This is down at Chickasha down there in the bottoms, Pettyjohn. This is a long summary. We looked at N and P management, NPK management on Bermuda grass. That's, what would you call that stand down there where we're at on the north side? Coastal? A common. All right. So it common established in a long time ago. 70 something. All right. So we do have, this is also similar to, I'm not showing you, I had pH blocks down there that I took from about a 5 up to a 7 for 5 years, and it never changed the yield. Also a common from the 70s. So how much of that grass growing in that environment slowly acidifying over time, does that grass just naturally kind of adapt to its slow changing environment? That's why I'm saying old stands, I don't know how much when. New one, you drop a seed in there and it's going to react. You drop a sprig in there, it will react. But a stand that's been sitting in that environment, slowly acidifying over 30 years, I question, I've talked to some of our physiologists, how much does that plant just kind of change with that system and just slowly adapt to that environment? We look at this as yields. We looked at ammonium nitrate, 50, 100, 150, 200 pounds of ammonium nitrate. We throw in some phos, we throw in some potassium. These rates were based upon previous year's yield removal. Whatever we take off, we put back down as phos. Whatever we took off, we put that back down as potassium the previous year. So I used 16 harvest to determine 17 fertilizer. We look at this in the environments, the phos wasn't horrible. In fact, I think the P down there is probably about 25, 30 ppm, right on that margin. K, it is a deep sand. It's a sandy loam soil, pretty deep. Our K was probably sitting around that 100 ppm. Still not horribly low, but marginal on the K. We get this at 150 pounds over many years. We're averaging that. Don't see a whole lot of value with 200. This is one-time spring applications. We get a little bit of a boost on the phosphorus, not much. We get there with 100. We're adding half a ton per year just by managing potassium. Now we're putting a lot more on. It's probably economical, more than it's needed, but we're grabbing a half a ton per acre per year minimum on our cuttings. And this goes, some years we had 1 cutting, some years we had 3 cuttings. You guys remember, I think we started this when Redfern was here, probably in 12, 13, and managed it to a couple years ago. So we had some really great years, and we had some really rough seasons. Very little. First year, a whole hell of a lot. And something about grad students grabbing burlap sacks coming out of the Carter harvester filled with sand burrs, and we got pretty aggressive with burning and maybe other things that I could say I used my research label for. But sand burrs were significantly controlled after year one because we weren't doing it year two. Does that make sense? So we did have that. Urea and ammonium nitrate, looking at the difference, we did have some boosts with that ammonium nitrate at that 100-pound rate over the urea. How much is that volatilization? How much of it is that system with the urea putting it out with the springtime? Didn't really dig into that. Moving through, I'll go ahead and get it. We got the PNK in there. 30% only. We're just hitting in this range. Not 1 year over all the years. That 100-pound rate wasn't much different than the 150-pound rate. But I tell you, in the good years, we needed 150. But if you average them all over time, we're back to the 100 being the best. That's where we go. Hit it, that spring shot. And if you look like you got moisture in June after that first cutting, then let's play on that one. So that mixed application 2-3 timings based upon environments where I want to go there. But going back to your potassiums, the winter, moving through these because I had a lot here, not knowing how long everybody's going to take. More trials, looking at P&K at different rates. Bermuda grass, all of our forages, it's all about the potassium. If we want to do better on our forage systems, we got to do better on our potassium application. Nitrogen, I want to move through because there's some more tickets I want to hit and get out of here. This is where I want to come in at. This is one thing that I really want to sit for just a couple moments and just have a brief talk about where we're going, where I want more research to go. What I want to tell you right off the bat is what I think. So this is just me thinking. This is not me scientifically saying I've got the data. How many of you are from west of I-35? All right. The rest I can guess are from east of I-35. See, that's the science going in. How much of you have driven by range or prairie in the last couple of years that you say might have been slightly overgrazed? Bullshit. More hands. Have we had drought in the state of Oklahoma over the last 6 years at one point in time? Yes. Can you say that our producers are great at making sure that there's 4 inches of forage on prairie ground going into July? Huh? If it's woody. Yeah, we got 4 inches of giant ragweed. We got 4 inches of all the other things. Going back, how are we supposed to manage our prairie hay systems? Are we if we're haying them, are we supposed to pull 2 to 3 cuttings a year off of prairie hay? No. Have we? 2, yeah. Are we supposed to be grazing it all late summer long from July through September? Should we have it stocked at 2 head per acre on that prairie ground? No. When's the last time OSU recommended to fertilize prairie ground? We don't. When's the last time that system had what you would call a great stand and longevity of stand? Years ago. One, I can't change management. You all know that. You can't hardly change the management, but we got to be thinking management of our system, taking our prairies back to how we used to manage with rest. Rest is critical on longevity of this ground. It's critical on the longevity of the species that we're trying to grow, and even the eastern species. We've got to rest that system. It's got to accumulate. It's got to be good through that time to make it through that winter and be there. One thing I want to look at is that we have not done, but I want to tell you, I think it's critical because when it was looked at in the 80s, it was a different system. We've got to be looking at P&K management in our prairie system, range and prairie. I have gone out and pulled more than a couple soil samples on ground that's not supposed to get fertility because it's prairie or range and we don't get a response to it. And the phosphorus is 3 and the potassium's 20. I don't care what grass species you have. Those are not good numbers. Those are not good for longevity of a stand. Those are not good. We've got to look at cautiously enter, really looking at some small plots. And I would like some cooperators in here to help me out on that. Again, many hands make short work, but we got to look at the system. Not a lot of in where we're not supposed to have in, but a little in does help when we're trying to rebuild after some hard springs, hard winters. Really look at that P and K. Phos doesn't have to be high. K, we really got to start looking at the K in our system because the K is what we have exported off. Looking at some different opportunities to work with you, work with the counties, work with you on some maybe NPK strips where we supply some fencing and we fence off a part that never gets grazed and we fence off a part that grazed as it should be over a couple years and look how that land responds to a little bit of management. And then we can graze the wadden out of the other part of it. Like we can see what the producers are going to do with that. This is something we got to be doing. I'm telling you guys, I want collaborators. I want to help. Dr. Phillips is in on it. We've got Danny there. Dr. Adamson is going to be in on it. We've got a look at this system because we have just ran it too hard for too long. And OSU has said, that's fine. Don't fertilize it. Don't manage it. I think we're at a turning point now. We got to start admitting that we've got to rebuild some of our systems. And it might take a little bit of effort. This is what came out about the only data. I need to see what's out there. It says that N is about 5 pounds, 5 pounds of phos, 30 pounds of K2O per ton. You do that over a lot of years and you don't replace it. Again, science, you guys should have learned science class mass balance. You can only remove so much until there's nothing left. With that, I'm not going to go this stuff. I can show you the lime treatments. I got all that stuff. If you want to see data on anything, liquid calcium, on Pell lime, on all that, we've got stuff here in Stillwater that's 8 years old that's been getting Pell lime, 100 pounds per acre per year for 6 years, 7 years now. It's not changed the pH 1/10, 1/100th of a unit yet. 7 years of liquid calcium hasn't changed the pH 1/100th of a unit yet. 2 ton of ag lime changed the pH. So we got that. I want to break. I will open up. This is where I wanted to end up. I wanted to end up here early so that we could even end up earlier next. But do we have any questions for myself or the other two presenters? For Brian? Yes. Okay. On the Bermuda grass timing for NP and K or the range? Oh, the native. Okay, so the question is the timing on NP and K on the range. For me, the K doesn't have to be at green up. We need the phos there at green up. I need that phosphorus energy. And so we look back, I balance which is worse. And so if I'm going into a field that's got low everything, then I'm going to have it on that springtime. I want it pre-green up. So February, before we start getting any of those things going. If my phos is okay, I'm not really opposed to delaying it into the season just whenever the timing's right. Because that K, I really want that K to be in there as I start looking at building for the fall. And so I want it there by June so that it's really in the system rolling into July and building that reserve for fall. Yeah. On the nitrogen side, I don't want that nitrogen to, and I'm okay with, if I'm doing it early, that's more of a DAP map situation where the nitrogen just come from that. And if I need some little extra growth, I might do that urea later on, but I'm cautious on the nitrogen on this system. Was there another question? I thought I saw a couple hands. Yes, Mike. Yeah. Is below the zone. So the question is, my statement that I see the response in newly established Bermuda grass, but not old Bermuda grass. Could it be the root depth? It could be, but we still have our Bermuda grass is still highly compacted in that zone of acidification. And if we go to Chickasha, I was able to influence the pH down to depth, and it was acidic to depth. So it could be part of the stratification, Mike. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and we just kind of have to roll with it right now. Am I seeing difference in stolon and rhizome production in the low pH environment? I'm just not seeing any significant changes. It might be there if I dug around. I have not been like really looking at that. But over the years, I mean, this one location, we've been there 6 years, and well, they were supposed to go sample it the other day, and they moved the markers, and you can't figure out where it was. So, you know, I would like to say if we could see where it was, if I was getting that difference in stolons, if I was getting more rhizomes, then it'd be more evident. It's not. By the way, all those pH values are bad. That's what happens. You know, you use old disc to put in the field, and helpful hunters and friends always pick them up to put them off into the fence row.